And the mic is there, but do it like you're on Zoom so that it's turned on and off. The mic is there, but it's not.
Thank you all for coming. My name's John Kuntz. I'm on the Board of Supervisors in Middlesex County, Virginia. The reason we are here is about 2 years ago, I started realizing that there are significant mental health issues in the community, and it's not unique to our community. And I began asking myself, what could I possibly do from this position to increase awareness? And so I announced in January of 2020, before we were fully aware of COVID, that I would be personally focusing on mental health in 2020. And then COVID hit. And I really didn't accomplish things in 2020 in the way that I had hoped. And this was one of the things that really fell off for me. So again, in January of 2021, now with 10 plus months of COVID under our belts and increasing mental health issues, it became my focus again for 2021. And at some point, as a supervisor, you realize there's a lot in the community that you don't know about, and it's humbling. And one of the things of many that came across my desk this January was our lack of psychological counseling resources in our schools. And there's no fault to be assigned. It's not unique to Middlesex County or rural counties in Virginia or across the United States. And so it's important for me to make it clear that we have a lot of good people working on this issue. But the awareness for me felt like it wasn't enough. So I reached out in my communities, the various circles that I've got from my past and my present and hopefully my future. And I sort of post on social media, what do others do about this? How are we getting better results and where? And my friend from my college days, some 21 years ago at the University of Richmond, turned that Facebook post into a DM and then a phone call. And then we began dialoguing about his work as a psychologist focusing on mental health issues in rural America. And so we're going to do introductions, but I think the story that I'm telling is that when we decide to focus on things and we consider that there is more to be done, we find lots and lots of partners. Do we have everything fixed and solved at this point? No. But what I found is Kent and I started reaching out to members of the Middlesex, Virginia community, and we found law enforcement was dealing with mental health. We found the schools were dealing with mental health issues, and in particular, suicide. And so we'll have some statistics for you about what we know, but we found the CSB, the Community Service Board, is working on these issues, and suicide awareness and prevention. And certainly my interaction on the jail board, it occurred to me that there are lots and lots of people working on this from very different angles. And a lot of times people like me, who as a supervisor am asked to be a leader, one of the first things I had to sort of acknowledge is that I don't know enough. And there are people that do. And if we just come together and recognize that we are not alone, we are working on these things together, and we cross-pollinate between the various departments, both private and public, expertise, non-experts like me, but people that want to raise awareness. There's an opportunity for us to build what we are calling We Are Not Alone, which is, it could be called a committee, it could be called a town hall, it could be called a roundtable, but this is just something we've been planning for the last 4 or 5 months for us to come out and dialogue a bit about what we know, what we've seen working, what our experiences are, But if nothing else comes out of this, from my perspective, it's the real notion of we, and the idea that as a community, we can be our own net. We don't have to be professionals. And we all have been touched by suicide. It may be 2 degrees, it may be 1 degree, but there's nobody that it discriminates against. And so if we can become part of the solution and just recognize it's not that you are not alone, it's we are not alone. And that means by nature, we can do more together than apart. So thank you all for coming. I'm thankful for the weather. I'm thankful for my new friends. I'm thankful for deeper relationships that we've developed on this topic and just in general. The idea of our departments all working together on anything is exciting to me, but on this issue in particular, it's very important to me. So thank you all for coming.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Dr. Kent Corso. I'm a clinical psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. And some people call me a suicidologist. That's someone who's a specialist in the research and training and practice of treating suicide or suicidal symptoms. Tell you a little bit about myself. I was trained as an Air Force psychologist right after 9/11. And at the time, we had more deaths due to suicide in the military than due to enemy fire. And so suicide was a very large focus for our work as mental health providers in the military. And so that's where I got my training, my expertise. I had the opportunity to do quite a bit of research and program design, prevention, and this is by far my passion. And so grateful that we're able to come together and talk about this. I will sort of function as a moderator and sort of try to generate some real honest conversations today. There are folks who are watching virtually, and so we'll address that in a moment, but go ahead and we'll continue the introductions. Thank you for being here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Rebecca Morgan. I am the director of the Middlesex Department of Social Services, and I'm honored to be here today. For anyone who knows how to start a conversation in a community, in order for it to be successful, it shouldn't come from social services or the community services board or the sheriff's office. It should come from the community. And that's what John has done for us today by gathering us all together. Whenever you have a grassroots function like this, that ultimately leads to something powerful and meaningful, it has to be community-led and community-based. And so I'm very excited to be part of this today. I did want to sort of piggyback on Dr. Corso's remarks about the military. Middlesex County was actually identified a couple of years ago as having one of the largest veteran populations in this part of Virginia. So we're at about 12%. And our agency was tasked with a project called Ask the Question. And we began questioning clients who came in, just doing a short screening on whether or not they had ever thought of suicide. And if so, we went into a deeper dive into what that may have encompassed. And so this is something that was started at our agency, by our agency. And most of you probably had not even heard that. And so that's why we're here today, to get the word out and to really have an honest conversation about what meaningful differences we can make for our community.
Good afternoon. My name is Casey Mewborn. I'm lieutenant with Middlesex County Sheriff's Office. One of my specialties with the Sheriff's Office is mental health. I am a CIT trained officer, which is a critical incident team. I'm also a trainer. I train in that. I personally seek out all various types of mental health training to help better our community and our department. And just also to piggyback on that, we probably have currently 8 employed veterans of the military within the Middlesex County Sheriff's Office, with 2 of them at least being current as well.
Hello, I'm Janika Joyner, licensed clinical social worker and owner of Higher Elevation Psychosocial Services in Chesapeake, Virginia. I am licensed in the state of Virginia and wanted to make it my business to address the needs of the underserved or those who aren't heard in the whole state. And that's why I'm here. My goal is to advocate. My goal is to share resources. My goal is to assist. I specialize in trauma as a certified clinical trauma professional. And I believe that I believe that a lot of underlying issues with anxiety and depression were exacerbated because of this unprecedented time that we're in, and rates are up, which is alarming. Children are affected, adults are affected, even animals are infected. This thing has changed us. So it's my goal to make sure that we're talking, that people feel comfortable, and that they're heard. And that's why I'm here.
Thanks for introducing yourselves. Just a few housekeeping items here. This is oftentimes a difficult conversation. And so what we're going to do is when things are difficult, you just have to face them and hit them head on, okay? To walk around them, dance around them, to talk in code, that actually makes stigma worse. And suicide is definitely an issue that has a lot of stigma attached to it. Even words like committed. We hear people say, he committed suicide or she committed suicide. And the problem with language is important. The problem with using words like that are that they are somewhat judgmental. There are two things we typically commit: sins and crimes. And so it furthers stigma to us for us to use words like committed. In fact, people who are thinking about suicide may not come forward and share that they're struggling out of fear of being judged. So as we talk about this difficult conversation, we also want to be careful not to trigger anyone. So if you're watching from a distance, if you're watching here in the room, if you need to take a break and step out, please do. Self-care is important. And as we ask some questions of each other and sort of some rhetorical questions just for you all to think about, they're hard questions because this is a hard issue. And so we're going to try to take the right step forward and look for some helpful answers, which is not going to be easy. So why don't we start just by a show of hands? And if you're watching virtually, you can raise your hand if you want to. Heck, if you're in with a bunch of people, great. If you're alone, great. So raise your hand if you have known someone personally who has died by suicide. Okay, so everyone in this room has their hand raised. Just want to point that out for the viewers at home who can't see that. It's interesting because suicide is still one of the top 10 causes of death for adults in America. It is the number 2 cause of death for children and adolescents ages 10 to 18. About 50,000 Americans die by suicide each year. I've told you not to use the word commit, but I really didn't give you a good substitute, did I? So instead of committed, we say ended her life, killed herself, he died by suicide. So 3 ways to avoid the word commit to make it more accessible, more easy to discuss is died by suicide, ended her life, ended his life, killed himself.
Kent, could you expound on that? Because I struggled when you identified that for me. I understood it. I tried to change it. I immediately forgot. And you had to remind me. And at that point, you and I had, I think, a pretty good conversation because I've been accused of being somewhat liberal in my politics. And a lot of times the perception is that's really snowflakey language change that doesn't mean anything. Can you dig a little bit deeper and tell me how I tell my friends or suggest to my friends why this is an important change?
So fair question. If it's important for us to be willing to ask hard questions and be willing to, if you see something, say something, right? So there's this idea of a gatekeeper prevention program. What that means is if you remember maybe in the 80s or 70s, there was something called Neighborhood Watch, where you have to keep an eye at what's going on in your neighborhood. And if you see something a little shady or suspicious, you either confront it or you call the authorities and get help. After 9/11, if you see a suspicious package sitting around in the airport or somewhere else, a public place, a public building, say something, right? And so suicide is no different. Suicide does not discriminate. So from our perspective, politics are irrelevant when we're talking about the language of suicide. It's not about politics. What it's about is making it okay for people to seek help and accept help. Just because I ask someone, hey, are you struggling? Can I help? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Doesn't mean they feel comfortable talking to me. And so if I say, are you thinking of committing suicide? No one wants to commit something. It sounds like you're doing something wrong. So it shuts down a potentially beneficial conversation that would allow them to maybe engage or accept help.
So both in retrospect for those that have died by suicide, when we're discussing that to learn more for that family and for those that are grieving and for future improvements on how we address this, but also for the future, if you're talking to somebody that's going through a rough spell and maybe has ideations in that direction, we're taking away the idea that it's your fault. You got yourself there, and starting to understand that we're all here. We're here now. One of us isn't anymore, but it's not necessarily that person's fault. For me, this whole thing really turns on in my mind when we start talking about we, both in a preventative way, but also in a way that it just points out that mental health, especially coming out of COVID, we all are more aware of mental health issues in ourselves, in our children, in our community than we were 14 months ago. And there's a possibility, I think, to come out of this even stronger as a we, at the community level. And I really like the Middlesex County community level, where 10,500 people, it seems attainable. If I went out to address suicide internationally, I think I'd be completely intimidated. If I went to address it for just my family, I'd feel like, why did I draw the circle there? But for me, I feel like I have some influence at the county level, and I have friends that are specialists that are willing to come down and visit and get to know my county. And I have department leaders that have experience and training. So for me, I know I'm derailing you a little bit, but it's just the idea of creating more we in our lives and cross-pollination between departments and experiences at the county level at 10,500, it feels attainable to me.
I think it is. And the idea of we are not alone is that idea exactly, that we would like to help people understand that they're not alone and we collectively are not alone. It's perfectly okay to seek help. What I would ask of those people sitting to my left and right is, what do you see locally around that idea of, if you see something, say something? Is that a concept that's well understood? Is it a concept you feel comfortable practicing, that you see others practice?
Just to kind of piggyback on that, you said something a second ago, and I'll help it resonate with the way the world is today. You said neighborhood watch, where you see your neighbors. Well, thanks to social media, our neighborhoods have gotten a lot bigger. Our neighborhoods are now nations. So we'll get phone calls at the sheriff's office from other states saying, "Hey, I saw so-and-so on Facebook last night, and I think they want to hurt themselves. I think there's something wrong. Can you go do a welfare check?" And that's how we'll end up as law enforcement and with these types of interactions. And that's one of the things that we do in our department, and I want to say probably in this region as a whole, due to our training, is when we do sit down to talk with someone, we don't ask them, "Hey, do you want to commit suicide?" We say, "Have you thought about hurting yourself? What are some of your ideas? What would you do, or how would you do it?" And it could be hard, but them being able to talk about it puts you in the mindset of how you are going to go about to help them and find resources for them. So that's some of the language we have to change as law enforcement. We take the stigma away. We take the blame away, because everyone's struggling.
Lieutenant, do you find that people are unaware that local law enforcement is as engaged on the mental health? I mean, the press recently obviously has talked about law enforcement, but in a way that I feel like law enforcement hasn't been able to participate in the discussion. Do you feel like when you go to homes on calls like that, where it's a wellness check, do you find people surprised that it's you that's showing up?
Sometimes they are like, "Why are you here?" Sometimes they're, "Oh, I can't believe they did that. I was just joking," or however it may be. But then sometimes there are people that are very thankful because we did reach out, because we did get them the help that they needed, and also family and or friends that did the reaching out. But I also find that I'll share these type of stories with some of my own family members, and it kind of blows their mind that we have to get involved. We do more than just traffic tickets. We do more than just burglaries. We wear as many hats as there are in this community, from things to I've responded to a call where a lady couldn't get her water to cut off on her fridge and it was flooding her floor. So I had to go help her until we can get a plumber out to her. We do everything. And we ultimately will get stuck holding whatever's there until we can get it the appropriate help it needs. And it's especially like that in law enforcement. And so that's why we are pushing to try to create more resources in the community with the help of the CSB and some of our legislation and tweak laws, and certainly push for more beds in the state hospitals and private hospitals. That's becoming more and more an issue for us. So
I'll just say, we are very lucky to have a true community police force here in Middlesex County. I think we are the only two agencies that are on call 24/7. They are the first responders, and social services is often the second responder when they call us in to assist. And they do deal with many things beyond just crime. And so we are very lucky that we have that available here in our community. I just want to talk briefly about some of the cultural stigma associated with suicide that we see at our agency. On screenings that we do for older adults for services, there's the standard, have you had thoughts of suicide or any attempts in your past? And older adults here in Middlesex County make up approximately 30 to 35% of our population. And screening them and asking that question, and the responses I've had through the years have ranged from, of course not, and a biblical summary of why suicide is wrong and how they would never do that, to someone telling me about a time in their past where they did think about suicide and sharing that story with me. Also want to talk about, we're focusing on equity this year and the cultural differences between someone who may be a person of color and someone who looks like me. When talking about suicide, there are differences, and there are various realms of privacy associated with the taboo of that topic. And so what my staff and I are working on this year is learning more about how we can engage to help people, and putting ourselves aside, putting the screening tools aside, and really focusing in on how do we get folks to open up to us so that we can truly offer the help instead of just being a government official or someone with a badge.
I would just like to say that whenever addressing anything that has been traumatic or is traumatic, that collaboration, and I hear that, and that's a strength. So saying that we work together versus some agencies or some locales, that's not our job. That's not our job. And I love the fact that you all are balling up the fist, and that's how you punch suicide in the face. That's how you really get the word out. You all are each individually a finger, but you're balled up as a fist, and that is mighty. So you have the ability. And now when people can trust and say, you're saying I don't know if I had $1 for every we I just heard. We is that collaboration. We are not alone. Therefore, I'm a part of something. If someone feels a part of something, they're going to be willing to reach out and say, hey, or if someone approaches them, they're going to be more likely to say, I can trust you because I know we're in this together. I understand that you have my back. I understand that you have my best interest at heart, that you're not going to judge me. Or if you really can't help me, you can point me in the right direction. So I love the fact that you're collaborating. And I love to see the fact that people want to collaborate, because it can be hard sometimes because I got it, or we don't want them to know what we're doing or going on here, but keep at it in any way that me and Chesapeake, Virginia can help you all. I want to be a part of that fist.
absolutely. That's definitely one of our tactics when we're dealing with any of this trauma and we're having these conversations. We let them know, say, hey, I may be here now and I'm who you're talking to now, but I'm not alone. I'm going to have someone from another agency follow up. I'm going to have social services stop by, give you a call. We're going to let you talk to the CSB. We're going to get some pre-screeners talking with you. We're going to offer you as many services as we can get you to get you through this trauma as we can, to help you get past what you're going through. And that seems to help open up very good lines of communication, dialogue, and they've become more receptive. Instead, like you say, instead of shutting down and thinking, continuing to feel hopeless and alone, and so that we can get through whatever anyone's dealing with.
So I am not from Middlesex, as you might have noticed. That sounds great, but let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What drives people to say, this is my lane and this is your lane. This is my part of the job. This is your part of the job. What are the barriers to some of that true collaboration, whether we're talking about between agencies or between the public and those agencies? The one that comes to my mind immediately, and again, not knowing the details of the county ledger, but finances and budgets, right? Those affect our manpower. It affects our shifts. You just said you're the only two agencies on call 24/7. That costs something, right? And so just want to ask about barriers to further collaboration.
We'd have to also, it's not just Middlesex. So the CSB is also on call 24/7. They're pre-screeners. So if we have someone who is in a crisis and is in need of someone to talk to or to figure out if they have to go meet the criteria for hospitalization, they of course are also 24/7, but they are not just Middlesex. Our CSB is 10 counties, 16 jurisdictions that they have to serve. So that's another resource that we do have. But certainly money is always a barrier for every problem that we have. And I think us being rural, once we get through some of the basic barriers, another big one is transportation. We do have things that we can offer, but we have to get that person to it. That's a big one for us. I know CSB often has issues with that. We have certainly had people that did not meet the criteria for us to take them into custody, but they wanted to get help. So we would give them a ride just to try to get that step.
To be clear, you give them a ride. That's not protocol. It's not funded. It's just doing the right thing. Am I correct?
Correct. But we have to be, I don't want to say choosy, but we have to be careful because we can't do it all the time. And certainly that takes that officer from serving the community, away from the community for, a small amount of time. But if it's a necessity and we have to make that call, we have to get it done. So.
And I'll just say, transportation definitely is a barrier. However, we have taken some steps. We do contract with a counseling agency that comes to our department once a week. But the barrier of having to come to social services to access services is something that we have not been able to solve. And you mentioned finances. I think we need to look at not only finances of our community, but also the finances of their clients. And I think that sadly, we get a lot of calls on underserved populations, and maybe we're not getting the calls on middle upper class families who may also be experiencing the same kinds of crises. And so I think that is a key barrier for this community. And I think it's a key stigma that we continue to get past. Social services is not just for those in poverty. We serve the whole community.
I want to jump in on two things there. The funding, I'm only in my first term as a supervisor. I wasn't even elected school government. I'm not a very popular person in general, but I'm learning a lot as I go. And funding is really hard in a rural community, and in particular in our community. Everyone seems to come down on the side that taxes are bad and they should be low. And I don't want to be political, but the reality is taxes are not bad. They're not good. They are a mechanism to fund the things that the community wants. And if the community doesn't want to fund things, then they don't necessarily want the taxes. Now, there's always a question of, are you wasting the tax money? And I think everybody agrees. If there's waste there, it needs addressed. But at some point, what I've learned, I think, in 3.5 years sitting here is there's another way to find money. There's always more money elsewhere, and there are federal and state programs. And it astounds me, Rebecca, when I learn about the money that you're asking of the county for your department and how small that amount is compared to all the state and federal money that is being leveraged. But it's not, I mean, still we're using taxes. We pay all that state and federal tax too. It's, you know, we're not getting away from it. But beyond those layers of taxes, there are monies that can be found through grants that are from private organizations as well as public organizations. There are monies that come regularly from our local philanthropic groups and from national and international philanthropic groups. And what I've learned about politicking or being a supervisor, an elected official, is if it's unpopular to raise taxes, then find another way to raise money. And you guys each in your departments and in your expertises know more than the elected official by default, by having been in your departments and knowing where there can be money raised and where there can't. And so I sort of evolved from, well, I'll figure it out. We'll just raise taxes and then we'll have money and we can throw that at that department and that should fix it. But with suicide in particular, money is definitely part of the problem. But I think the other part is, you know, we need our departments to really step up and advocate for why they need that money. It can't simply be, I mean, I went, and I'm not picking on the CSB, but this shocked me. I went and sat with Chuck Walsh a couple of years ago, who ran the CSB previously for 30 some years, knows everything about how the CSB works. And it was budget season, and I went to his office and I said, why are you asking for the same amount as last year? And in the same conversation, telling me how much the problem is underfunded. And he says, John, I haven't seen a supervisor in here in my career at budget time. So I make my presentation, and I mean, so I'm not putting blame at Chuck Walsh's feet. And this whole thing is not putting blame at anybody's feet. I want to be clear about that. But as we each get into our little roles, beyond just being humans that care about the people next to us in our family, the people next to us in our neighborhood, the people next to us in our community, people in general, we really have to understand that there's going out and finding money. But I think maybe even more importantly is creating these sinews between these different parts of the larger body. You know, I look at diversity all the time, and I think that is one of our best tools. Go hang out with somebody you don't know that well. Go look into a department that you don't understand. I mean, the sheriff's office, Mickey Sampson and I, it's almost like a bromance at this point. We talk almost every evening, and he and I have political ideologies that don't line up, but I'm curious about him and his role in that department. And he's allowed me a space to have a relationship where, even though there are assumptions that both sides are making about that person, we're having deeper conversations than I thought I could have with the sheriff's department at a time when there's a lot of people that are saying, that's how they are, that's who they are, we know that about them because I saw it on the news. So my point in all that is, yes, we need funding and we need to be smart about where we put it, but we need deeper relationships, not just with people we don't interact with regularly, but even with the people that are my good friends that I was having dinner with last night that I would never ask, are you really okay, man? Like I probably, even in my deepest relationship, I may not be all that comfortable pushing the envelope into a place where it's like, I've noticed some things and I'm worried about you. So we getting deeper and more relationships, I think, is part of the solution too.
If I could just sort of paint a broader picture, what I hear you saying, John, is the status quo is not cutting it. And the status quo is not cutting it with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The vast majority of research studies on suicide, mental health, heck, physical health problems are done on white males. What's the normal temperature for a human being? When you take your temperature and you're trying to check if it's normal, what is it supposed to be? 98.6. That was derived from a medical study of 10 white medical students in the 50s. And we use that universally in our country to capture every possible temperature someone can have, and we call it normal. 10 people. So 10 people, 10 white dudes, 10 white guys, that's generalizable to the whole spectrum of who we have among us in our community. And only in the last half decade did we scratch our head and say, let's question the status quo. Let's take a look at it if that really is the best model, tool, rubric, yardstick, whatever makes sense to you from your framework. Is that the best way for us to understand this? And it's not, okay? And so same with funding. If John talked about federal, private, public funding, there are also very generous benefactors, very generous people who donate, philanthropic efforts. But there are also people like you in the community who know people who might care. And so if we want to disrupt the status quo with this, and I'll share some facts in just a moment, but I'd like to try to finish the thought. We can do so much more together than any one of us can do individually. And if we can be connectors and help connect the dots between the people who need and the people who can help, we're going to move the needle. We're going to move the dial. About 50,000 people a year die by suicide. There has never been a time in American history, Virginia history, I do a lot of work in Arkansas, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, rural environments, rural frontier states, Alaska. There's never been a time where we've reduced the suicide rate by even 15% and then sustained that reduced rate. It's never happened. I would argue we have better control over COVID-19 from a population health perspective than we do suicide. And so if we continue to do the status quo, we can expect that number to continue to rise. And so from our respective departments, specialties, licensed clinical social work, et cetera, government, what can we do individually to make sure people are not alone so that we are not just kicking the can down the road and doing what we've always done? Because what we've always done isn't working.
Yeah, thank you. For anyone who's ever seen me do a presentation to a community group, one of the slides says, because I inevitably get the question, what can we do for you? And I always, and they want to write a check, and I say, thank you, but I need your time. I need your passion. I need you to show up when we call for your help. You don't have to be a professional to help. And that's how I think we get to actually moving the needle on any problem. But I think suicide for this community, I think would be a great place to start. And I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly, I think this type of event is certainly a leap in the right direction. It's communication. That's the one thing that we can all offer that only takes it doesn't matter how much I make, because I can offer you my time. We can sit down and we can have a communication, we can have a conversation, we can say where we're at, what we're feeling, and maybe come to different ideas. And certainly if that's all it takes is for you to donate your time, everyone can do it. And sometimes that's all it takes.
We can mention national statistics all day, state statistics, but what's happening in Middlesex County? So how many suicides have we had around here in the last few years? I have a number in my head that I've been advised about, but I'd rather hear from people who have maybe been affected by it, experienced it, or know something a little more personal about it.
I know I ran the numbers. It's been a while, so I don't have them. And certainly, those are slightly skewed, but it's more than, we'll say it's probably more than 10 a year here in Middlesex. And it doesn't need to have a color or an age or a gender. It's all over. It does not. It's that feeling of hopelessness that people get to, and then because they weren't able to either for one reason or another reach out to someone, it took over. So that's one thing I like about conversations like this, is that we have the ability to take that stigma away, especially for people that are in law enforcement, military, or caregiver roles, because they've lived their lives professionally as caregivers, and they think it's a sign of weakness to need help, but it's not, We see so much on a day that we have so much vicarious trauma in our lives, and that we share with our families just from telling stories.
Can you unpack vicarious trauma? It's a big 3 syllables, 4 syllables. I struggle with it, so can you just help us out there?
Vicarious trauma would be.
Kent's from Northern Virginia, a little slower.
So the vicarious trauma would be the things that I see in my line of work that I pass on just by talking about it. Just putting images in someone's head that they now have a sense of what's going on, and it can be heavy if you're not ready for it. It's impactful.
Can I add to that? Vicarious traumatization, that is a word, okay? Plain, the cost of caring. The cost of caring. If you're in a helping profession, the role, even just being a listening ear. If you care about people, if you care about what you do, and you're hearing about their traumas, their adversities, their challenges, their struggles, their hurt, their pain, you are going to be impacted. You are going to be impacted. And it's okay. We can anticipate it, but we can also transform it. Being a therapist who specializes in hearing trauma all day, I am going to be impacted. I'm sure if you're hearing about suicide, you're going to be impacted. However, it's going to change us. It doesn't have to destroy us. So the fact that we know this is going to happen makes it easier, because sometimes we're not taught this in school. I don't care how much education you have. Sometimes you don't get it. We have to learn that I care about people. So me caring about people is going to cost me, and still decide to show up and do the work anyway, and do it the best that you can, which is more than self-care, more than the massage. It's knowing your limits, your boundaries, knowing who you can rely on, who you can talk to. And hey, I need to tell you something, but I need this to be in between us. I'm going to go seek help. I need a mental health day. And it being okay, and not looking, well, what's wrong with you? No, I understand. Take your time.
Yeah, and I just want to share a couple of things. Casey referenced at least 10 folks in Middlesex dying by suicide every year. I think that number is probably much higher. Again, with our older population who maybe dies of natural causes, we know, because there are cases, and we know these folks, that the causes are not always natural, and they've reached the point in their life where they feel like they are a burden to their families, a burden to even our agency, a burden to their doctors and other caregivers. And I'll talk about the children. Many of those in social services know that we do not walk away unscathed, and that vicarious trauma that children experience as a result of the mistakes of their parents and what that leads to, especially in that 16 to 18-year-old range. We had one not too long ago, and it just, I can't tell you what that does to us as human services professionals. But you're right. And I think too, one thing our agency has really worked on with the sheriff's office to reassure everyone out there, you've got these guys in badges with guns, and they're big and they're strong, and then you have my complete female staff, and we're actually able to have conversations about the impacts that it has upon us, and to get to that level of trust with such a diverse sort of group has just been phenomenal. And so that's one way that we focus on that piece of it.
A couple things that really hit me when you talk about the elderly population. I think people don't think of that as suicide, but many of us have had friends or family towards the end of life in a hospital, and the conversation in the other room is, I think she's giving up. That's a form, am I right? Is that a form of suicide? I mean, it's on the spectrum, and whether it is or it's not, the point is that person was done trying. And I think about law enforcement and the idea, not just law enforcement, but the people that run to the fires, the people that run to the crashes, the people that run to the carnage. A lot of them think that's what they want to do at a young age, maybe when they're not even fully formed. And if you want to know who cares, it's the person that shows up when your legs twisted over the back of your head because you just ran into a deer or whatever. And that person's, I don't think they quit because they're not paid well. And I think a lot of times some of them that should quit don't quit because they wonder who else is going to do this. And you know, the other thing that occurs to me, because it drives me nuts to see some of the compensation that we have in local government, that I'm privy to see what those numbers are and compare them to surrounding counties. My goodness, the people that care don't seem to care a lot about how much they make. They're choosing their profession and all of this carnage that is impacting them personally, mentally, that they're taking home with them sometimes. And they're not making what they're worth. And I come from, you know, a part of society where I went to the nicest school. I had an opportunity to climb ladders within my career. And the focus was, for the first 20 years of my career, how do I make more money? How do I become more valuable? How do I get more training? And then I started having a family. And then it was, well, how do I make sure there's still enough time for family? You and I were talking about this, you know, and I was talking to my brother about this. How do I make enough time? And it seems with COVID, we've just gone through a time where suddenly we even have less time. And everybody remembers a year ago when the employers are like, if you need a mental health day, take a mental health day. When's the last time your employer said that? 14 months ago. They're like, you know, the profits aren't there like they were, and business models have changed. And so there's all this pressure, even for the people who had nice little career paths and who, you know, whose families continue to grow up and time keeps marching on. But there's stresses that come in all of our lives where if we don't compartmentalize and sort of and check in with ourselves, and if we don't have those deep relationships with friends who will be honest with us and say, you know, John, why do you spend so much time on this county stuff? It pays $8,000 a year. Like, shouldn't you be focused on work or your children or your family? Sometimes I need to be reminded by that close, deep friend that can call me out. Like, am I using my time as well as I can? And then I know I'm talking too much, but the other one that I thought about when you were talking about the elderly, if you haven't gone to do something like Meals on Wheels, you don't understand what Rebecca's talking about. You open that door and you come in with some food, and that person, that was literally the highlight of their week. So we don't have enough people doing Meals on Wheels, and the people that do it, a lot of them are becoming elderly themselves, but they're those passionate caregivers that keep finding another gear until somebody else comes and does it as well. And when you show up out of the community and as a supervisor, I mean, they looked at me like I was crazy. You're doing Meals on Wheels? And I'm like, well, I gotta know what it is. And I mean, I felt like a celebrity. I mean, this woman was like, I can't believe you. I'm in the car with the supervisor. And I'm like, I can't believe you can't believe that. Like, but the point is, I mean, they are so wanting more people to do what they're doing because they know how important it is. And until you actually come out of your comfort zone and go and do something like that and realize, wow, 2 hours of my time once a month might have saved some lives or improved the quality of life to somebody who was a major community member at some point, who gave lots and lots of their lives. And now, you know, people died off and they're left alone. And it's not about the food, I'm telling you.
Right. It's about the person. It's about the relationship. It's about the gesture. John, you used the word family. The kinds of things that are coming to my mind have to do with values. So what do we value? Why do we get up in the morning? What's the most important? If you had to write a quick list, what are the most important things to you right now in life? What would be on that list? How many of your daily activities align with that number one priority? Or are they aligning with that sort of number 5 priority? And so what we know about suicide is when people think of suicide, one of the things that's happening, we've heard hopelessness. We have heard Rebecca say feeling like a burden. We know there's something called thwarted belongingness, great Scrabble word. What it means is you desperately want to be a part of things, but something's shutting you out. You don't feel a part of things. Okay? I think we can look at any population, whether we're talking about kids, whether we're talking about LGBTQ+, whether we're talking about the elderly. The world is moving fast. There are elderly folks who have no idea how to use the internet. They don't even see the benefit. So even where information and resources, that's the Bob Barker part, right? The Price is Right.
No, we were just talking about the elderly not knowing how to use the internet, and it went.
And so what we have to consider is that it helping someone else may not be because you are a first responder or because it's your vocation, your career. It might be because you value caring about someone, because it feels good to do something good. We know many, many people who have attempted suicide and lived to tell about it have said, I would have told anyone what I was thinking and feeling, but no one asked. Now, let's be clear. If you have lost someone to suicide, you're a lost survivor. Okay, that's the term for it. If you've lost someone to suicide, don't feel guilty that you didn't see it or didn't reach out. Okay, there's no benefit to feeling guilty, to self-blame. That does nothing for you except rakes you over the coals. Okay, so don't look in the rearview mirror on that. Let's look through the windshield. So what are the warning signs for suicide? What are things that we can look for that are those moments that we'll know, oh, how you doing? How is everything going? Can I be helpful? Are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Right? So I would just ask some of our experts up here, what are those warning signs?
I'll just give a few. So I'm thinking about a coworker who died by suicide. She was at work on Friday. We had an event, and on that Monday, she was dead. We had no idea. A lot of people took it personally. We thought about what could we have done? In an instance, in hindsight, individuals were saying, I saw them in a panic and they got a bad phone call and I didn't follow up. Sometimes if someone is getting shocking news, it can be life-changing news. It could be something about their health. It could be something about the loss of a loved one. And we don't, oh, I need to check in with them to make sure they're okay. That follow-up is important. If an individual is off of their routine, if they're known to post on social media at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and 8 p.m., and then they are ghosts for 48 hours, check in on them. If an individual obviously is saying, you guys would be better off without me, nobody would miss me, like you were mentioning, that's, an indicator, red flag, but some subtle things that individuals miss. A person who changes status rapidly, and I mean from going from the most affluent, I have it all together, to my house is in foreclosure. I lost my stability. An individual who we look at that, I thought you really cared about that autograph baseball. Why are you giving that to me? I thought you loved mom's watch. Why did you say I could have it? Those are some of the things. And then guess what, guys? Sometimes we won't get it, because sometimes a person has made up their mind because it's their choice. It's a choice to die by suicide. It's not the only choice, but it is their choice. And they may not want to communicate it. So like you said, there's no way to kick yourself in the butt and say, well, I should have, would have, could have, because they're gone. Now you can use that windshield to see who else I can save. Who else out there needs my attention? Who else out there can I get to and support?
And I would say for kids, cyberbullying has sadly become part of our common language, especially the past year when most social interactions with kids have been online. And our school folks are here shaking their heads. And that can be hard for parents or others to pick up on, because you want to give your kids their privacy. You're not wanting to stand over them 24/7 and look. But how many kids have I seen and I found out later, oh, they were being bullied, or someone put a picture of her on the internet without her clothes on, or the cruelty that some of the kids that I've worked with go through. And that can be hard to miss for an adult who's not part of that world of teenagers. And so, Casey, I'm sure you have quite a few signs. He can talk about when we decide to take away guns from people. Yes.
Certainly, you know, you mentioned you had a lot of the key ones, but it's when people start becoming more recluse and breaking personal ties with family and friends, and maybe getting rid of personal things, or you know, they can. I've also seen them change the other direction where they'll go out and spend a lot of money on things that they shouldn't be spending, or buying lavish things, almost becoming manic about it. Those are all certainly warning signs. And then when you talk about red flags and taking away person's firearms, you can look at the red flag laws that we have now, and certainly, of course, anytime anyone, let's see how to put this, if we do take them into custody because we believe they're a danger to themselves or others due to a mental illness, and they do become at a civil commitment hearing, after that hearing for civil commitment, if they are pretty much anything other than released on their own recognizance, they then lose their Second Amendment rights. Right then, they will no longer be able to purchase, possess, or transport a firearm until they petition the court to have that back. So, which kind of means if we ECO someone, emergency custody order, which turns into a TDO, a temporary detention order, and then they have their after 3 days, they have a hearing in front of a judge or a magistrate with the psychiatrist and the counselors there, and they determine that either they themselves say, yes, I seek more help for 30 days, or they involuntarily get committed, they're going to lose their Second Amendment rights, and that goes into a database.
And so just to talk specifically, the data that the sheriff's office reported when we asked was that there have been 23 of those emergency custody orders or temporary detention orders in the last year, and 33 suicide attempts and or calls in crisis about potential suicide attempt. So we're talking about north of 10 suicides in the county, and it's an underestimate, okay? And then, so we're looking at demand signals, right? How can we get an indicator of what's happening? Well, we certainly know the end state, 10 plus suicides. And we certainly know some of these other warning signs like 33 potential attempts. And those are the people who are somehow coming onto our radar. That doesn't include anyone who's thinking about it but hasn't reached out, or the people who've reached out and we just don't see the signs, we don't get the message, right? So Janika made a great point before about people that we're not going to catch everybody. There's this idea out there that we can prevent every suicide. And hey, from the heart, that's wonderful. But that's not possible. If we've never even reduced the rate by 15%, how are we going to get to zero? That's fuzzy math. That doesn't work, right? Those people who truly want to die, they're either already dead, or they're the ones where we look back and say, we didn't see any signs, because they're determined to not let us see it. That's how in pain they are. And let's be honest. Suicide is an escape-oriented decision. Life is unlivable and I can't deal with it and I don't know how to fix it. And maybe one solution is to just eliminate myself as the person who has to experience it.
To piggyback on that, and I've also seen where it's also the ability to take back something where they want control. They want to have the final say. Like their health has declined so much that they know they are losing their ability to make any decisions or control, and they want to have that final bit of control back.
It's that light at the end of the tunnel, right? I feel powerless, I feel helpless, I feel hopeless, but wait, there could be an end to this, and I could actually make that end happen. I could facilitate that.
So one of the things that occurs to me is we're talking about getting better individually as non-professionals out there like me at understanding the signs and then knowing, okay, what can you do that would be helpful? But one of the things that occurs to me, I keep going back to, I need less relationships. I need deeper relationships. And I look at the last 20 or 30 years and we have all of these Facebook friends. Isn't that wonderful? We're even sometimes competing with each other about how many friends we have. But how many of those friends are you looking at their signs? And their signs are not what they're posting. They're posting the best of what's going on in their lives. We are doing that. I'm guilty of it. When I'm happy, I share a happy thought. When I see my son do something funny, I take a picture and I post it on Facebook. And 1,000 people see it that I call my friends. But are those the friends that I'm really going to work on a deeper relationship with? I mean, some of them, sure, because they are actually my deep, close friends. But geographically, a lot of these friends that you worry about are closer. But what I think in the last 20 years, we've sort of confused what friendship is. And when I hear about cyberbullying in particular, and I think about, me as a parent and how am I, I had a conversation with my stepson in the truck on the way to school this morning. And he said, this other kid got the game ball at the ball field. And he's my friend, but he was like sticking his tongue out at me and like bragging about the game ball. And man, I really want a game ball. And, part of me wanted to say, well, that's not a friend. Dismiss him, done. But the reality is these kids are still figuring out what's right, what's wrong. And what I tried to do as a non-psychologist, guessing because as parents, we often are guessing. And we often find out what doesn't work and what does work. And we often find out that trick I had with my oldest doesn't work with my youngest. But what I tried to redirect there was, gosh, how did that make you feel? And were you surprised that Bo would do that? Like, maybe a stranger on the other team, whatever, but that's your buddy. And he drove off and did that. So you didn't get to really talk with him about it. But maybe you need to talk with Bo about your friendship and its depth and sort of, Bo, that hurt my feelings. Were you just kidding? Or like, why was that game ball so important to you? Because I know it's so important to me because it means I'm successful at this thing that's important to me. But I was happy you got it. I wanted it. I mean, I kind of wish it was mine, but there's going to be another game. But I hope if I get it, I share that intense victory with you in a way that is honest to God sharing. But it's one of the things I like about living in a rural community is you have a little bit of commute time with your kids sometimes. And sometimes you do the same with your friends. You and I drove around, you wanted to get to know the community. I introduced you to some of my deeper friends and, that time, you can't spend that kind of time and have those kinds of relationships with 1,000 people on Facebook.
So we have about 30 minutes left. And I think there are a handful of things that want to come back to Second Amendment and firearm safety. That's an important item. Want to come back to, okay, so if you see something, let's say something. So how do you say something? Lieutenant, you shared some ideas earlier on. Perhaps if Janika and Rebecca could also share other ways to say something and what that might look like, whether it's on Facebook and virtual or whether it's in person.
I've seen on Facebook the calls to action where people are utilizing the different color hearts and actually checking in and saying, how are you doing today? It's easy to say fine, and that's a red flag for mental health professionals. No one that is fine is really going to say fine. But asking, how's your heart? What's been stressful for you lately? Sometimes just hearing stress or, how are things different for you? What things are challenging for you right now? How can I help with that? But everyone is a resource, and you do not have to have a degree to help. Not saying you have to do therapy, but you don't have to have a degree to help. And knowing that there's no judgment. And if you speak with your face like I do, if you hear something that's hard, just try to remain even and not, what? Okay. No, just say, wow, thank you for sharing that with me. I know that might have been difficult, but I care. And what you said was hard for me to hear, but let's talk about, what we can do to get you some help, or I know someone. And that's how I get a lot of the referrals. People will share something that I put on Facebook and they say, go talk to her. She's a therapist, or they know, or she'll know who to send you to. It's being able to be willing, but also going the extra mile sometimes and inboxing someone and say, hey, are you okay? I've noticed that your posts are a little different. I saw 2 months ago that you lost your mother. And, after the dust settles and people say, call me if you need me, that really doesn't happen. So really following up, asking someone how beyond how you're doing to, specifics. And you're not being nosy. And for me, it works because I'm a therapist, so I have to ask questions. Be okay with just asking questions. Like, how's your heart today? Like, how are you today? Not just how are you doing, but how are you feeling mentally? How, are you getting enough sleep? Have you ate lunch today? Did you have lunch today? I didn't. All I had was coffee. So again, just the general questions, not, hey, you thinking about killing yourself today? Immediately. Sometimes you have to warm someone up to get them to that point. And if they're like, why are you so concerned about me all of a sudden? I've always been concerned. I've been observing first.
You can also follow up on that and say, hey, are you taking care of yourself? Are you making sure, did you get something to eat? Did you get something to drink? Can I help you with that?
Yeah, and I would say we had something during COVID called the Make the Call initiative. And so what happened during COVID was our reports of child protective services plummeted because kids aren't in school. And I see our high school counselor back there shaking her head. Most of our referrals come from our partners in the school system. And when we were getting the reports, they were terrible. And so I would say, keep your eyes out. Your neighbors, if you see something, look, if it's not a valid report, you're not getting someone in trouble. You're opening the door for us to be able to help them. And nobody else on this earth might know what's going on in that household except for you because you live next door or whatever it may be. For adults, our reports actually increased. COVID was very focused on older adults. They were the most high risk. And I would encourage that. I so really want to see this community stepped up for older adults here. And I'm looking at our primary adult protective services worker. We had just in fiscal year, 21 or 20, which ended at the end of June, we had 115 reports, which for a small town, we're about double what, we're almost to the levels of Gloucester with air numbers here in Middlesex. And that's a testament to this community. And so checking in with your neighbors, I can't tell you, just the other day, I ran into my neighbor. His name is Bill. And Bill was in the hospital. I didn't know about it, but now I do. And if Bill needs something, he can call me and say, hey, can you give me a ride or can you bring me a meal? So just those small 5-minute interactions with people can just be so, so helpful. And making the call to us, again, you're not getting someone in trouble. There's that barrier of, I don't want to get involved. And, even our school staff struggle with that sometimes. Oh, we don't want to get beyond that status quo and point to a problem. And please, I urge everybody today to make the call because it could ultimately prevent suicide and many other things. We haven't talked about substance abuse, and I'm not going to open that can of worms. Kent's never coming back here. He's like, these people, I came to talk about suicide. And
let's be clear. What kind of sick person wants to come talk about suicide, travel to talk about it? It's everywhere. I could talk about it in my backyard, right? But let's touch on substance abuse just for one moment, right? So substance abuse can both contribute to suicidal thoughts and behaviors and feelings. It can be how people cope with their suicidal thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. And we're not just talking about alcohol, right? We're talking about pain medications, opioids. We don't even know there are about 59,000 per year annual overdoses with opioids where someone dies, and we don't know whether to count those as suicides or non-suicides because the person's deceased and we can't put together all the information. 50,000. That's the same as how many people die by suicide per year in our country. So remember that one or two warning signs that I don't think we've touched on is that people can be very impulsive. I think Janika mentioned this before, is this sort of agitation, this panic that people experience in the moments leading up to them taking their life. And so when we think about feeling panicked and feeling, it's that sort of like you've got this burst of adrenaline, this your fight or flight response, you're just cranked up, and that's an uncomfortable feeling. And so your thoughts start racing. How can I just not feel physically so intense? And oftentimes people will hit the bottle of pills. And what we know is that's where people get impulsive. So when people seem really amped up, cranked up, I'm trying to use multiple words here to describe it, it's physically noticeable. It's really agitated. And so substance abuse is we know 42% of people who attempt suicide, they just had a relationship breakup. 29%, it's a substance abuse issue. 29% of suicides. So there are about 7 factors that are very common. I'll call them triggers, antecedents, events that precede a suicide attempt, and their relationship problems, substance abuse problems, a crisis coming up in the next 2 weeks, or a crisis that just happened within the last 2 weeks. Financial and legal problems, housing loss, job loss or job stressor. So it's not that we can just look for these and that's going to solve suicide, because frankly, we've known about this for 30 years, but we need to be asking, right? So it's taking that next step. This is, if you're not uncomfortable with this conversation yet, I'm sorry, maybe I'm going to be a bearer of bad news, but let's turn it up one notch. There's someone in this community who climbed to the top of a water tower. This was within the last few months. We had already been talking.
Cell tower.
Cell tower. Thank you. Cell tower. We had already been talking about this event and how important it was. And I got a call from John and he said, "Holy Hannah," those are my words, not his. He might have used a more, 4-letter word. So Holy Hannah, we were just talking about doing this and it's happening right now. I, of course, was doing a Zoom webinar teaching clinicians how to work with suicidal patients. So it's relevant to me in that moment. It's relevant to this community. And there was a save there, right? Now, that doesn't mean happily ever after, but what it means is by someone recognizing something was happening, the community mobilized, right? So there are success stories, there are saves. It's very clear that when we do lean in, lean forward, reach out to try to assist and try to, again, not just toe the line and do the status quo, the benefits come. Benefits come. Few other quick things that I think are important for us to touch on, and certainly we have some Q&A. One thing we haven't talked about is that we've been talking a lot about how if you see something, say something. But we also know that there are people in the community, maybe even in this room, who are not going to say something. Maybe they're law enforcement. Maybe they're a veteran. By the way, 22 veterans die by suicide every day. Die by suicide, not attempt, die. That's veterans of all wars, okay? If you carry a firearm for your job, if you have a security clearance, if you have some sort of a public position, those are deterrents to seeking help. You're not going to seek help because then it really may impact your career. So not only are you now struggling personally, emotionally, but now financially, that's the last thing my family needs is for me to have to ride the desk, right? And so what I would ask is that we look at this from a different perspective, right? We've been looking at it, if you see someone struggling, let's say something. Now let's come at it from this angle. And if you're struggling, what should you be looking for in yourself? And how do you say something? Why should you bother reaching out for help?
Because you're important and you matter. People care about you. So again, only you can do what you do, how you do it, and your why is why you're here. And you have to be here to do it. So as a mental health professional, people think, oh, your life is perfect. No, I normalize. I have issues. I make mistakes. I have 3 sons and a whole husband. So life is not peachy cream for me. Not a half, a whole one. Not a piece of one. I have a husband, I have challenges. I face adversity. However, I take care of myself and I know when I'm not okay. So if you start to notice, you don't want to collaborate. You don't connect well with people. I want to isolate, and I love Golden Girls, but I can't sit home and watch Golden Girls for a whole weekend and not get up and interact with my family or even check in with someone. If you notice, from the time I get off work on Friday at 4:00 until Monday, I'm drinking and binge watching Netflix. You know you better than anyone. Janika Joyner will never leave her house without earrings. If you see me in public without earrings, ask me, are you okay? That isn't it. So if you're known for being this person who is bubbly, outgoing, optimistic, and then all of a sudden you're this, increased cynicism and everything's negative, you know yourself. I say do a temperature check, a pulse check, and sometimes people will notice it as well. But if you feel off, okay, why am I having dreams about somebody that I work with? Why am I concerned with who's sitting that close to me? Why am I not eating? Or why am I eating too much? So you know yourself. And when you start to deviate from your norm, then you may say, okay, this is what she was talking about. I may want to reach out to someone and understand that it's going to happen. You're going to be affected. You can think about suicide. It's common. You can think about it. Everyone probably has thought about it. But if you're thinking about how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and plan to do it, then, I maybe need to talk to someone about this. And confidentiality. If you're afraid about your boss or your superiors or someone finding out, then that's why you do it up front when you notice it, so it doesn't get to that point. Because then they're going to say, hey, you're slipping or something's off. When you take that vacation, a rule of thumb, every 3 months that you work, you should be taking a week off. And if you could not take a week off, take 4 days. Zoom or telework or not. If you're working 3 months and you have the time, use it.
Just one thing that's important for us to clarify. She just brought up something really important about thoughts of death or dying are pretty common.
Yeah.
And so let's drill down on that for one moment. There's a difference between I am so overwhelmed that I wish I weren't here. Things are so unfixable. I'm in such a hole that I don't know if it'll ever get better. I just want to fall asleep and not wake up. Those are thoughts of death and dying. That's pretty common. That's what happens when we're overwhelmed and we're feeling defeated and helpless and hopeless. But that's not suicide. People who, many of us have experienced that at least once in our lives. And those aren't the people who then go and attempt. It's when I'm so overwhelmed and I wish I could fall asleep and not wake up. And now let me think about how I might make that happen. So if you're noticing those thoughts in yourself, take a deep breath. If you notice, I wish I were dead, that's an indicator, a barometer, a temperature check that you need to try to fix something you're doing. Do it differently. Seek help, whether it's formal help or whether it's talking to your friend or family member. But don't be scared that, I'm going to lose control of myself. That's not really how it works. But if you wait for it to go as severe as Janika described, then it is going to be hard to control yourself.
And another thing that really resonated from what you said, Janika, is the idea that every 3 months you need to take a week. And you automatically had the rebuttal answer, okay, you can't take a week, take 4 days. Like you just have to keep drilling that into your head that if you time isn't valuable enough to you, what time is? And we all do it because I feel like everybody's more busy today than they were yesterday, and it's not getting better. And then we look at retirement and we're like, well, maybe when I'm 80, and it's sort of like, okay, at some point I'm going to live a life in here, right? And, and I get accused when I go to the Outer Banks on vacation, on a nice vacation with my family. Dad, why do you look like this? Like we're all here. It's not really a vacation. I haven't really focused on me. And this whole thing has made me think of mental health in particular as sort of vehicle maintenance. And some people are very good at certain parts of it. Like, I exercise all the time. Have you checked in on yourself mentally? Like, are you okay? And if you can't figure it out for yourself, find that best friend and ask them, do I seem off? Because if you can't see it, and it can happen because you can be successful, you can be wealthy, you can look happy, but if you're not sure, then you need to have a conversation.
And I'll go back to John's point about building those friendships, real friendships, deep, meaningful friendships. You have got to make sure that you build your natural support system in your life, whether that be friends, family, because we all are going to go through something at one time or another, and we're going to need to reach out and lean on that support system. And so take the time now to really work on those relationships. And I think that's one preventative thing that we can all do. And I know my buddy Casey over here is a huge traveler. He goes to lots of places, foreign and exotic. And I think that's how he copes. And I think it's a great strategy.
Just to kind of build on something you said earlier, and I think everyone probably in this room and everyone watching, we've all been sad. We all know what depression feels like. We've all been depressed, but not many of us have truly felt hopeless and really thought about truly ending it. And to get to that point is a step for some people. So, but don't be afraid to open up and talk about it. And when we talk about earlier, some of the things you were saying, I could say for first responders, but more importantly, everyone at this table, everyone who is a caregiver, certainly once that cup gets full, you can't help anyone. If you can't help yourself, you can't help anyone else. So you have to be able to reach out and help yourself to get more room to give back to that community or back to giving the care that you give to others, whether it's in law enforcement or as a counselor or as social services or anything like that, any type of first responder. You have to be able to take care of yourself. You have to look at the warning signs. You have to have open communication, and you have to want to help yourself.
That check engine light is going to come on. You're saying that check engine light, and sometimes you ride with it for a year. Sometimes you know what's going, but we have to pay attention to it.
And what does it look like? It's going to look different for you than my check engine light looks, that hers does and his does, right?
That's right.
And some people take black electrical tape and put it over the little light, and it's like, I never see it. And like when you get in your friend's car and you see black electrical tape over the freaking check engine thing, hey, why do you do that? Well, this is how I drive my car.
And so let's make it real. So that's what drinking is. Okay.
Coping.
Now, I'll be clear. I used to be a bartender before I was a psychologist. It was great training. It's the same thing. That's right. I still love to bartend when we have company. But drinking to feel numb so you don't have to feel what's going on in your life, that's putting the black tape over the check engine light, right? It's a mask, right? It's a way of escaping. And so whether your escape is alcohol, whether your escape has to do with spending, gambling, I mean, there are a ton of bad behaviors we could all end up doing. And when I say bad, what I mean is they're not helpful. We've been talking around this issue of values. What's important to you? Why do you get up every morning? Why? What do I want to do on this earth? Why was I put here? That's why we get up in the morning. All of these other things, they might be fun, they might be entertainment, but if we're doing them because we can't answer the question why, that's not putting our best foot forward. That's not being our best selves, right? And so what we know about, just a few facts to again, keep this in perspective. What we know about people who are thinking of suicide is they don't only want to die. They just don't want to live this way. So they're ambivalent. It's not this state of being indecisive. I don't know if I want to live or die. It's no, I really want to live, but all this stuff is in the way and it's making life miserable. It's an obstacle to me actually enjoying those reasons I get up in the morning. So life isn't worth living anymore. So I guess maybe I should just go ahead and do it. But so this is for, again, self-reflection. If your check engine light's on and you're ignoring it and you're like, I don't know why I get up in the morning. I'm not quite sure. Spend some time thinking about why you might want to get up in the morning, right? Because that's what's going to keep you trying. And what we know when we work with people who are thinking of ending it, because they're thinking, I want to live and I want to die. And we give them a little bit of hope that why do you want to live? Well, because I want to travel, or I want to do something important for my community, or I want to, whatever is important to you. That's what keeps people trying and hanging in there. So really do check in with yourself about, am I kind of not clear on my purpose, on my meaning in life, on my values?
So Kent, we're getting close to the 90 minutes that we sort of allotted here, but what really occurs to me is there's a lot of talking that can be done between a lot of people, and it's not just the experts or community leaders. It's all of us need to talk. But if you're not sure who to call, I know in preparing for this, we talked about some email addresses, some phone numbers. We have an audience that's live. We have an audience that hopefully will be able to see the recording. Can we talk about, for Middlesex residents in particular, and maybe even nationally, some of the things that we know as professional, I'm not a professional, but you as professionals know, where should people call? Where should people email? Both nationally, but for Middlesex, what do we have in place in terms of emails and phone numbers, please?
Yeah, so if we take a look at our flyer, for those of you on camera, and everyone should have a copy of it, our COPE Crisis Hotline is the local screening through the Community Services Board. And this number up there is the 1-800 version, but you can also dial 693-COPE, C-O-P-E, 693-COPE is the local version of that. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline from a cell phone is 988 green button, 988 green button. And that is staffed 24 hours a day. I called it during a staff meeting a couple of weeks ago just to test out and make sure someone answered, and they did. And obviously, and I'll let Casey refer to this, if it's something happening in front of you and is urgent, don't hesitate.
Absolutely not. 911, call it. And we will help you. If you can't remember that, we will have it for you. We can also help you get in touch with NAMI, national mental health organizations and things like that.
If you have insurance.
Just real quick, when we say 988 green button, we're just talking about on your cell phone, the green button. It's the same as 911. It's just 988.
Yes, and also if you have insurance, now flip the card over and you see mental health services for you to call, or go to the website and see what services are available or crisis interventions you can receive and utilize. So those things are available as well.
We've got Tammy here from the local Community Services Board. Just want to give her the mic for about 60 seconds. Sound good, ma'am? Okay. She's going to come up, I think, on that side because that gets her on camera for the viewers at home.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I'm Tammy Oberndorfer, and I am with the Middle Peninsula Northern Net Community Services Board in Prevention, Health, and Wellness. And we're just touching base. We're downstairs. We have, as our prevention efforts in suicide, we have a task force that meets quarterly. As part of that task force, we've developed suicide prevention walk that we do every year. Unfortunately, due to COVID, couldn't do it last year. We're hoping to get that going this year, November. Typically, I think the tentative date is November 6th. It's a Saturday, 10 to 12. But some of the other things we have actually on hand and that we hand out, I was working with the lieutenant during our drug take back day here locally, and we have medicine lock boxes in my handy dandy little bag that we were giving out during the drug take back day. We have a couple different sizes, and also we give out gun locks. And again, we're not asking people to give up their guns. We just want to put one more barrier in the way of somebody at that moment, in that moment of helplessness, hopelessness, just slow them down. Okay. And go see some of the other things. Apologies. Yeah, we do through Gloucester County High School. We have an SOS program, Signs of Suicide. So we have purchased these materials, and they do it throughout the year. See, they do it in the 9th grade and the 12th grade, big transitional time, starting high school, then getting ready to go off into their further careers as they leave high school. This is done through, like I said, the high school. And if anybody, say Middlesex or anybody else interested in that, please feel free to contact us at the CSB, and we can hook you up.
Thanks so much, Tammy. I want to put a point on something that Tammy said. She talked about having trigger locks or gun locks. Among people who have attempted suicide by firearm, when they live and we interview them and we say, how many minutes passed between you thinking, I think I'm going to end it, and reaching for that firearm? 20%, it was 5 minutes. If we can buy 5 minutes, that's 20% attempts we can potentially reduce. 70% made the decision to shoot themselves in 1 hour. So this is not something that is like rocket science. This is buying time. When people can ride out that storm of being so distressed, on the other side is safety. And so please hear us clearly. This is not about a Second Amendment right. There are times where responsible fire owners will lock up their firearms. And in all of the work I've done in this, when they're having company over, sometimes they lock them up. If everybody's going to be drinking or doing other stuff that impairs judgment, they lock them up. If there are going to be a bunch of kids around running around their house, they lock them up. It's simple firearm safety. And so if you have someone who lives in your house who might be suicidal, is there any benefit to locking it up? The problem is no one ever thinks they're the ones who they have to lock it up from. And that's where we overestimate how much you can lose control if you wait too long of your check engine light being on. So just really want to hit that home because they are so helpful and we can save so many lives if we just practice preventative maintenance, firearm safety, right? Finally, this is the start of a conversation. This isn't the end of a conversation. And so would encourage you, if you are able to contact any of the people sitting up here to be a part of the continued conversation. On November 6th, there'll be the Suicide Prevention Walk. That's not the only part of the conversation. We're going to keep this conversation going and we welcome anyone who'd like to assist. I do want to thank everyone who's sitting up here and assisting with this. I want to thank all the agencies and folks on that board, especially Cornerstone Whole Healthcare Organization, who has helped sponsor this and put this together. Any concluding comments from our panelists?
I just want to add the same thanks and also thanks to the people who will take this to their network and share it. It's in your inbox at this point, and it's just a question of you saying, maybe you don't share this presentation, but maybe you look at that relationship that you're worried about and ask yourself now, am I doing enough? So I think we all have to look at ourselves and we have to look at our relationships, and I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to meeting with all of you in a couple of weeks and sort of doing a postmortem of how did we do? Was it effective? What more can we do? Because really that's, in my mind, what We Are Not Alone is about. It's about us continuing to have a dialogue as a community about how we can be an example of one community that's doing better on the statistics.
I'm a little bit of a stickler. So I would have a heavier ask, and I'm not an elected official, so there's really I'm not afraid to take the risk. If you don't sort of end this session today and do one thing differently, just one. Do one thing more than you're currently doing. That will help disrupt the status quo. That will help us at least lean in to the problem.
We've called this a hard conversation, but I don't think it has to be that hard. You just have to care. And I think if we start caring more about each other, the conversation will have itself and the help will be there. I would like to thank everyone here. And I wanted to kind of reiterate something that Rebecca said earlier. She said, we've all said, see something, say something. Do not be afraid to call on social services. It is not a punishment. There have been plenty of times where I or the other officers at the sheriff's office have responded somewhere and just saw a family in need and said, these are services for you. Please go get them. Let me help you get them. And they are a resource. They're not a punishment. So just remember that, not a punishment.
And so not a punishment, and you are not crazy. First of all, because if you don't get anything out of this from me, I'm telling you, you are not crazy. If you've ever thought about it, thinking about it, you are not crazy. And I would just say we're wearing these ribbons because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, but we also have the suicide ribbons. I normally end with the challenge and also just take a pause for those who have died by suicide. Just one pause. Thank you. So again, the challenge is do something for yourself. We're whole creatures. Your mental, your physical, your emotional, your financial, and your spiritual. We're whole creatures, so do something for yourself. If not today, what can I go and look at your calendar and schedule a vacation? What was the last place you went?
Last weekend, I went to Tennessee.
Tennessee, okay, well, we can put that on the list. He just went to Tennessee. I'll be in New York soon, so, plan something.
And how about a staycation?
A staycation is fine.
If you can't
Virginia Beach
afford
is
the
close to
time or
me.
money
Yeah.
to get away, staycation works too.
Staycations work just as well. Just tell people not to bother you and you can put your phone away.
So we are not alone. So thanks so much for being here. Okay.